Welcome to the RAMP series. We are on section component number 10, small group responsive services. You will notice on the slide that this has a point value of 6. So this is one of the higher point values you can receive. So this is an important component of RAMP. I'm Mark Carans.
And I'm Karen Griffith.
We want to do some disclaimers at the beginning here. We want to encourage you to always make sure you're using the latest version of the RAMP rubric. It does get tweaked now and then, and we want to make sure that you have that latest version. The tweaks are small sometimes, but important. Regardless, though, if the RAMP rubric is tweaked or not, the procedures and the suggestions we make in this webinar apply. It's really, really important that you use the rubric to guide your application, because it's what the reviewers are going to use to evaluate your application. It's very specific, it's very concrete, and you really must follow it to the T.
So your small group responsive services, you can find more about this component in the Ask a National Model Implementation Guide on pages 133 to 143. It includes examples, suggestions, and most importantly, ideas for how you can make yours better. So there's a couple of components. You're going to include an action plan, and once you've done an action plan, the other action plans will operate in the same way. So you did an action plan in Section 8 for core curriculum. You're doing another one for small groups in this one, but this one is only the small groups that you offer. In addition to an action plan, this component includes a results report for one of those small groups that you offer. According to ASCA, it counts as a small group if it has at least 4 sessions, and you're thinking about all of the groups that you conduct over one academic year. You also provide the lesson plans for one of those small group experiences, not one small group session, but one small group, all the lessons for all the sessions. And in addition, you have to provide the perception data instrument and chart for that one group that you submit as your exemplary lesson plans.
I think this one is difficult in the sense that it requires you to submit a lot of information. The core curriculum plan, the results report, the lesson plans, and then the chart, so that sometimes things get left out. We want to make sure you use the ASCA templates for the plan and for the results report. You want to use the template for the lesson plans that you are going to share on your small groups. So Karen makes a really excellent point. You're going to share the data story for one set of small groups. So if that small group met 8 times, you're going to share 8 lesson plans. It's really important that you are able to provide the rationale for why the groups are being offered, that they're data-driven, and then again, that data story becomes critical, the process, perception, and outcome data. And Karen makes an excellent point. You've done this work in core curriculum, planning and results report. So the content, it is no different in terms of process, perception, and outcome data.
The lesson plans is for one of the small groups that you identified on the action plan. And again, it's for the entire small group, not for a single session within the group. It counts as a small group if it meets a minimum of 4 times. You want the lesson plans to be highly detailed and comprehensive. We're not talking about a script or a verbatim report of what the lesson looks like, but you use the ASCA template and you give enough information so that the reader understands what happened in the session. You don't want to say that you conducted a discussion. You want to say that you conducted a discussion and identify the topic and perhaps some questions that you asked in that discussion. You want it to be developmentally appropriate and reflect best practice. You want these lessons to be tied to program goals and mindsets and behaviors, and deliver enough information, time, activity that they are highly likely to enable student mastery. It's more than just a presentation of information. It includes things that will help the students master the content. And then these lessons are going to represent your highest quality data plan for measuring. And then you're going to include the specific perception data assessments for the lessons. Now, with this lesson plan, because it's a small group, your perception data assessment is probably the same for the entire group experience. It's probably not one perception for session 1, one perception assessment for session 2. It's probably one perception assessment tool that you use at the beginning and at the conclusion of the entire group experience.
So small group responsive services. So we just want to really reinforce that the data, understanding the difference between process, perception, and outcome data is critical to this process. So process data is just telling us the facts. How many students? There were 8. You know, how many times did the small group meet? It met 5 times for 25 minutes. It met 6 times for 40 minutes. Just the basic facts. Perception data is really about what did the kids learn in terms of their attitudes, their knowledge, their skills. The small groups don't have to address all of those, but they're going to address some of that. So it might be a skill base. You might be helping kids add tools to the toolbox to deal with their anger. And you might be adding some knowledge around why controlling your anger is important. So you can see attitudes is looking at beliefs or how they think, and knowledge is I know something that I didn't know before, and then skills I can do. I have a number of different tools I can use to manage my anger. I think the best way to communicate the change in attitudes, knowledge, or skills is through a pre-post instrument. So you administer it before group 1 starts, before the first group session starts. You ask the students to respond to some items. You do the 6 groups, and then you ask them, and you ask them the same questions in the post, and you're able to then compare what have been the changes. Has there been growth? The perception data is clearly driven by the mindsets and behaviors. So in a small group that meets 5 times, you might have one mindset and behavior that you're really going to address, and you're going to address it thoroughly. It's not about the number of mindsets and behaviors that you address in small group. It's about the quality, and do the kids really have the time and the practice and the information they need to master the mindset and behavior and really make it a part of who they are as learners. And then you submit a chart summarizing the perception data. And that chart should really be able to communicate what kids now know that they didn't know before. We said it earlier. I think having another pair of eyes look at your chart before you submit it, and is that person able to kind of explain what the chart says is a really good practice for you to make sure that you're on target in terms of submitting a chart that is clear and does a good job of summarizing the information. And then outcome data is the academic attendance or behavior changes that occur as a result of the groups.
So the results report, again, is like the core curriculum results report. The same pieces are required. These are uploaded online, and you want the highest quality data reported here. You're going to give the information around process, perception, and outcome. You're going to include a data chart about your perception that's clear and easy to understand and quickly and effectively demonstrates that students changed. And once again, as in previous components, the implications piece of this report is what matters. How do you use what you've collected, what you've learned, to make your practice better? Be insightful, be thoughtful about those implications.
So in the narrative for this component, you can see what it's asking you to do. We think a best practice is to take that narrative and break it down into bullet points, and then you, because you have limited number of words that you can upload, you make sure that you write a paragraph that addresses each bullet point. Now if you have additional words available to tell us some other things, tell the reader some other things, that's important. But you have to address these 4 bullet points. You know, how and why the group topics on the action plan are included. What was the rationale for providing these support groups for your students? We want to know that. And you want to dedicate a paragraph to that. You don't want the reviewer searching for that information throughout the narrative. So you have a paragraph to address each of the 4 points that are listed here. Really makes it clear and concise for the reader. And for you too. I think it really helps you reflect on what some next steps are.
Again, the implications section of the results report is extremely important. This is insight that you derive from your analysis of the 3 types of data collected. You're going to talk about what worked and what didn't work. You're going to talk about how to make sure that the things that didn't work will work next time. How are you going to deliver this group better, more effectively in the future? How do you make sure that all of the members participate? How do you make sure that they learn the perception data pieces that you wanted them to learn? How do you change what you selected for content in order to get better outcome results? Whatever it is, it's talking about what did I learn through how I collected and what I collected, and how am I going to do it better next time?
So when you're going to choose, when you're looking at small group resources, choose the best group, the one that has the data story that's easily communicated, you know. And this process is never about picking results that are your best in terms of growth, because you have the opportunity to talk about the implications. And it's reasonable that sometimes we don't always hit our projected benchmark, but it's the process here that's really important. Reflecting on the results. As Karen said, what are some next steps in terms of how I would do it differently? And I think oftentimes we see in the reflection in this part that school counselors say, I tried to do too much in a short period of time. I got to do less is more. And that's fantastic. I mean, that's good implications. And then talking about what would be the priorities to really, you know, help make an impact, what mindset and behavior really needs to be addressed so we can have a change in behavior or attendance or achievement.
So you want to consider the developmental needs of your students when you're building your action plan. There are certain things that perhaps third graders need. That's a big transition year, and maybe there's some small groups that need to be targeted there. Maybe there's some things for entering freshmen that are specific for certain populations. So consider the developmental needs of your students when you're building that action plan, but also be driven by school data. We have large caseloads, and we need to be delivering interventions for students who are experiencing a lack of success or a lack of access, problems around achievement, attendance, and behavior. We're going to design groups around their needs and the context rather than finding a curriculum and finding kids who might best match that. Best practice is identify the need, then develop curriculum. And we're going to clearly identify the school impact on achievement, attendance, and behavior when we're investigating needs. If there's a problem but it is not impacting the school, then there needs to be some professional consideration around whether or not that's the school counselor's responsibility at this point.
So in the National Model Implementation Guide, there's always a section for each component that talks about do's and don'ts. I think this is an excellent kind of self-check, reflective piece, and you will see that we lifted some, not all, of the do's and don'ts from the implementation guide. And there isn't anything here that we really haven't talked about, you know. Include everything on the action plan that you do in terms of offering small groups. You know, there should be maybe a variety of needs being addressed. If you're using some research, best practice, let us know that. You know, following the ethical guidelines for small group facilitation is critical. and I think one of the things that Karen said, and I hope you really heard, is don't find a really cool curriculum and then say, let's do this, and find the kids who might be interested. That is not best practice. Best practice says we have a gap, we have a need, we have a concern that is evident through our data, and that's what we want to address. Or we have a developmental issue that we want to address. For example, we know that transitioning from middle school to high school is a critical developmental issue. We know that career planning, for what's going to happen in terms of specific choices for post-secondary is developmentally appropriate studying in high school. So sometimes there isn't a piece of data that says you need post-secondary planning, but we know it's developmentally appropriate. So this do's and don'ts is a really good self-check for you to make sure you're on target with your small group responsive services.
So this is an exemplar for a small groups results report. It's from a high school, and it was around a new student group that they decided to do differently and more intentionally. So you can see that they are focused on the social emotional domain and the academic domain, and they identified two mindsets and behaviors, mindset number 3 and behavior strategy self-management number 10. There were 17 students that were involved in this, and there were 6 sessions that lasted 45 minutes. If you look at their perception data, now this is their results report, so they're communicating the actual results of this survey that they used. They used a Likert scale, and they give you the pre and the post averages. The pre-test average was 2.8. The post was 2.8 and went to 3.8. That's a 35% increase in understanding the benefits of school involvement. They also did some pre and post around understanding the graduation requirements, understanding credits, knowing the dress code, knowing the cell phone policy, knowing where to find help, making friends, and joining extracurricular activities. The activities and the content was driven by what they knew students needed to know about high school. And then they measured that before and after. Their achievement data was a comparison of both behavior and achievement. They looked at the percent of students who were new that received discipline referrals, and they compared the group participants to those who were non-participants, who were also new but didn't participate in the new student group, which I think was kind of brilliant. And around achievement, they looked at the grade point averages of those new students and how many of them ended up being retained or met the promotion criteria. And again, their comparison for that achievement data was people who were new to the school who did participate in the group versus people who were new to the school who did not participate in the group. And then through their implications, they analyzed that result, and you can see that's quite comprehensive. They had some good results, they had some not so good results. For example, if you look at the achievement, 26% of the non-participants maintained their, 26% of non-participants failed one or more classes versus 23% of the non-participants, of the group participants, failed one or more classes versus 36% of the non-participants, which is good. But when you look at the retention rate, 29% of the group participants were retained versus 22% of the non-participants. So that's sort of counterintuitive. You would think if they failed fewer classes, they would be more likely to be promoted to the next grade, but that's not what they found. But then they addressed that in their implications. They talked about having a lower rate of failure rate for group participants, but a higher retention rate in the second paragraph of their applications. And then they talk about in the last paragraph what they're going to do differently. They're going to talk about different ways to reach out to the families, especially those who opt out of the group. Better ways to promote the group to people who transfer in. Better ways to target those in specific subgroups to get them involved. All of those things are going to lead to improved delivery of this small group for this high school.
So the pitfalls, this is there's a lot to this component, and again, you'll hear this frequently, that the data story wasn't clear and concise or accurate. There's that confusion between perception and outcome data, and then, like Karen has said a number of times in this component, the implications weren't clearly analyzed in terms of what did we learn, what went well, what are we going to need to do differently, what do we want to do differently, is this something that makes a difference? And so those plans for future improvement weren't clear. Again, I want to just state that in this component you submit a small group action plan. You pick one small group that has multiple lessons, at least multiple groups that has at least 4 or more. You share that in the results reports, and then you share those lesson plans from that group of from that small group, and then you have to share a survey that you used in that small group and an analysis, the results of that perception survey. That's a lot for a component. So really make sure you pay attention to the rubric. We want to say thank you for participating, and we hope this was helpful for you.
And good luck with your application.